actually, if you think about it, it's all comes down to the hiring part. Because if you have this dream of what the culture should be like, then everyone you bring in, you've got to make sure that that alignment is there, especially in the early days, where we've often turned people away who were supposedly smarter on paper or had better skills than some other people. I still truly believe that, yes, you can bring them in. They will not be as effective and impactful as someone else who on paper isn't quite as strong, but it's got that cultural alignment, fits in, is a great team player, and just, lives and breathes what we really want to achieve here.
Welcome to the Lab to Market Leadership Podcast. Too many advanced science and engineering companies fail to deliver their innovations from the lab to the market. We are on a mission to change that. My name is Chris Reichhelm, and I'm the founder and CEO of Deep Tech Leaders. Each week, we speak with some of the world's leading entrepreneurs, investors, corporates, and policymakers about what it takes to succeed on the lab to market journey. Join us. Lab to Market Leadership listeners, we're on the road, traveling throughout Europe, then hitting the US, then coming back to the UK. We're taking Lab to Market Leadership global. We're speaking to entrepreneurs, investors, executives, academics, and of course, policymakers to understand from an American, from a European perspective, what does it take to bring innovation and companies from the lab to market. And I'm delighted that we're starting off by talking to Sebastian Weidt, who is the co-founder and CEO of Universal Quantum. Universal Quantum is a leading quantum computing technology company. They are building actual quantum computers, full stack quantum computers. And today I'm going to want to get into what it actually takes to do really big things. Because that is so much of what deep tech is about, doing big things, bringing people together with different backgrounds, marshaling them, organizing them, implanting a culture or letting a culture grow and cultivate. But how do you maneuver that? How do you navigate that? How do you try to control that if you're a young entrepreneur and you haven't had the experience? Even if you're a super experienced executive, how can you get people to do really big things consistently? This is going to be a fascinating episode. Let's get into it. Seb Weidt, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
The journey from research to academia to CEO is actually still a fairly unique one, even in deep tech, even where you kind of expect it in very advanced science and engineering, but it's still kind of unique. How has it been for you?
Yeah, great question. I think for me, oddly natural. I think if I go back to early days, undergrad, and so on, I initially never saw myself in academia. I did an undergrad in physics with management, thinking that after my undergrad time, I would go into the commercial world. Did for a bit, did some consulting work, and ended up doing a PhD, did a PhD in quantum, and very much fell in love with it, and carried on that journey. And once once things work out and you're lucky on that sort of research track, you become an academic. And in the end, I went to professor level on that side. But I think if I look at the my motivation at the time, driven by curiosity around quantum, but very much having the sort of ultimate impact that quantum can have in the world. In my mind, I think it was one of the reasons I stayed in academia, because I knew at some point there would be that sort of commercial impact that I've always been driven by, and have just been very fortunate to be able to combine a love for quantum and the strong desire to do something really impactful in the world. So when then so there was a transition from researcher to academic, and then the journey from academic to someone in the commercial world, it felt natural. It felt like another home. for me. So it never felt that troublesome, but for sure that there are challenges, that there's huge differences.
Sure.
Between those.
And so did it feel, and so was it part of a plan?
Yes, I think there was for sure a plan. I think timescales, maybe less so, but I would say from, halfway to the PhD when that realization came through, hey, what I'm working on here could have a big impact on quantum computing. Back then, quantum computing was very much in its infancy, that there wasn't really anything commercially going on. But I think over time it became clear that this is not something that you can take all the way in academia. So there would have to be a commercial component coming in at some point to attract the right sort of talent and money and so on. So yes, it was on the horizon, but I think it was heads down and just keep developing and keep getting ready to actually take it to the next step.
That's quite interesting that you make that reference to, in order to take it further, we had to get commercial in a way, I guess. So there's that kind of love and the commitment and passion, I'm guessing, I'm putting words into your mouth, but I'm assuming they're there to go and try to solve this problem or to go and try to realize this future, this quantum future. But in order to do that, there's only so much that research, there's only so far that research can take us at some point. In order to really advance this and realize it, we have to go commercial. Have I overstepped the mark there in terms of my summary? Or
I don't think so. I think for quantum computing, that I strongly believe in that. Academia had a great place for quantum computing, and will continue to do so, to try things, to get your head around what the best route forward is. But I think that there comes a time when you realize, well, hey, I think I've got a reasonably good handle on this. It's about execution now. It's about, taking certain things the extra 10%. It's about investing significant money and maybe getting, some heavy hitting engineering talent in here to take this to the next level. And this is, in my view, academia just isn't well set up for that part. And that's when you really make that switch. Obviously, the question is then, do you then hand it over and you continue your academic journey, or do you kind of move with that and continue that journey?
Yes. You referenced earlier some of the challenges, or that it is a challenging transition to move from academia to CEOs. Everyone would acknowledge that. What have been some of the challenges for you?
I think for me, I mean, like I said earlier, it didn't really feel that much of a challenge, but there's most certainly, because I've been so excited about that, and it really felt like, hey, I'm back in the commercial world. This is great. But I think there are big differences in the way you communicate. You need to communicate your work differently in the commercial world to what you do in academia, and that might seem subtle, but actually I think it's huge, because at the end of the day, you need to convince non-scientists, non-physicists to join you on the team. You need to get people to invest in your project, and they speak a different language to what we're used to in academia. They may also be excited about different things. Something that I absolutely find fascinating about quantum computing and what we've built, someone else may find completely boring, but they get really excited about something else that we did, and finding out how to best position that to take the project forward is not easy, and it takes time, and it's definitely a different part than academia. And obviously the other part is you have structures around you in academia, that there's a HR department, there's a finance department, and so on. And as much as academics like to moan about that sometimes, once you don't have it at all and you need to build it from scratch, it takes some time getting your head around it, and a lot of thinking on what you would like that to be like. How does it support your culture? How do you build a culture? Right? You get that. I saw it as an opportunity, but it's a huge amount of work, and how you build a culture that just allows you to deliver and look after the people the way you see it being best for purpose. Yeah.
Is it taxing? I don't know if this is the right phrase, but is it taxing emotionally? Because to go from the stability, I mean, there's a risk factor in there, because you're moving from the security and fair, stability of an academic institution to something that is inherently risky. And that brings with it a lot of thrill, a lot of excitement, but also a lot of uncertainty. Some people will thrive in that kind of situation and others won't. As you're dealing with that pressure, as young entrepreneurs, of any age, are subjected to the pressure that startups throw on their executives, they can come under intense pressure. And that has an impact emotionally. And of course, those emotions can impact behavior too. Has that been a challenge at all? Or are you in control of that?
I mean, it's a great question. I think every founder, every CEO will feel pressure. It probably comes in different ways. I think for me, that the passion obviously dominates and is a huge driver. So I think I rarely looked at it from a security for myself part, but I think I most certainly notice as the team grows, you do feel that there's livelihoods around, right? You convince people to move continents with their families and so on to join your journey. That's something I think is important to be mindful of that. And to not be dismissive of that. I have that responsibility. I ought to feel that responsibility to our team. But I think for me myself, not so much. I mean, obviously, I had my first kid was born pretty much when we started out with the startup. So he's roughly the same age as the startup actually. So the listeners who have kids, that they will know that sort of sense of responsibility that all of a sudden comes in as soon as you have kids. So yes, that did come in, that is there. But I think ultimately for me, it was just following the passion and trying to do something really, really exciting and difficult. Just push it forward.
Yeah. Let's segue into universal quantum a little bit and talk about, I suppose, the approach that you guys are taking to quantum. There are a number of different approaches that you can take. And we see different quantum plays pursuing, that kind of operating systems layer. We're seeing, I think of companies like New Quantum, who are trying to do the networking effect. So bringing lots of quantum compute capability together via a networking layer. And then we have organizations like your good selves who are actually building the machines. Which is probably the boldest move to actually build actual quantum computers. Why did you guys pursue this approach?
Yeah, sure. I think just to my view is that we have a lot of bold leaders in our community across the stack. On the software side, on the hardware side. I respect anyone who actually comes into the sector and tries to push it forward immensely. I think the hardware side comes with additional complexity around the costs involved. It sometimes the timescales involved to commercializing that is a bit longer, and yes, some of it comes with a bit more risk. So that absolutely is maybe a bit more unique in that area. So why did we do that? I think, from the beginning of my journey, I've been in that hardware space. That's what I focused on, and I think at the end of the day, without the hardware, without these quantum computers, everything else around it won't be useful, right? Like we can develop the software and the applications as much as we like, but at the end of the day, we need these useful quantum computers. We need the hardware to unlock that. That happens that's where my expertise lies, and therefore it was very natural to focus on that, given that that's also where we've been doing a lot of our innovative work to really push that field forward. So it was just a natural one to push forward.
Yeah. Just how much of that stack are you looking to build and create?
Yeah, we're what people would call a full stack quantum computer. So we do some application work. We have a big software team, and we build the hardware. But I think the further up the stack we go into the software, into the application layer, the more we collaborate. And I think it's important to leverage the great work that's being done in the community as much as possible.
Yeah.
But yeah, at the end of the day, we like this end-to-end approach. We need to understand what customers would like to do with our machines. We need to have a level of control of what our software stack looks like and how it interacts with the hardware. So we wouldn't want to give that away completely, but we love collaborating on the high level side.
On the I'm curious about early partner or prospective customer engagement when you're operating in a field as bold as quantum. So we haven't had quantum computers before. We still don't have them. We're building them now. And so, in working with customers and partners to understand what a quantum future could look like, we're going to have to make a number of assumptions around capability, and then ultimately around the applications that are going to exist and the kinds of problems that are capable of being solved once we realize this future. How has that worked for you guys? How do you bring that kind of community with you as you're developing your solution?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it probably deserves somewhat of a complex answer. If you look at the sector as a whole, we do have some quantum computing prototypes that people can access today, and they act as a phenomenal engagement tool for potential customers, end users to start to engage with, to get a feeling for, well, what is this technology about? How do I use it? How do I program it? What can it potentially do? Now, these machines are not at the scale yet where they can deliver true utility. They're not changing anyone's life yet by delivering a new capability, but they allow you to learn. And it's a very important part. And there are companies who are very much focusing on that, trying to get as many customers to engage with their tech as possible. Now, from the realization that, well, maybe these machines aren't useful yet, what do they need to look like to be useful? How can we unlock some of these amazing applications? And I think, coming back to my personal drive to impact, you very quickly realize when you do the math, so to speak, on that we have to dramatically scale up the machines that we have today. I think we should probably stay away from technical terms, but qubits, these quantum bits that are so fundamentally important to the operation of a quantum computer. People use tens, maybe a couple of hundred of qubits today, but ultimately we need to get to millions of qubits. And it turns out that is incredibly difficult, really, really hard. And I don't think many people have a good idea of how to get there, which is one of the challenges of the sector. And this is really where we're focusing all of our energy on that scaling part. How can we take these beautiful machines that we have today, and how can we open that window of opportunity to scale to a level where we can unlock these amazing applications that we already know about today that quantum computing will unlock. So for us, therefore, the partners may look a bit different to someone who's ultimately focusing on making a machine available to as many people as possible so they can engage with it. For us, it's more having the long-term partners on who want to leverage the usefulness as soon as it becomes available. Partner with supply chain partners that help us get to that stage as quickly as possible. Partner with governments, because at the end of the day, that this is a national capability that we're creating here. So all of a sudden, when you think about scale, the partners that you may be looking for today might look different to if you're looking about pushing as many quantum compute resources into the market today as an engagement tool.
Yeah. And do these discussions impact? You're having discussions with the different types of partners you've just described. Do they impact the fundamental approach you take to the development of the computer?
Yes, they have a huge impact, and they ought to. At the end of the day, and I think that's it gets back to your first question. What's different between academia and industry? When we're in industry, we're here to serve our customers. We have to develop our machines in a way that they do what the customers would like to use them for. And therefore, we can't afford to fall too much in love with certain curiosity around the quantum nature of certain things. And therefore, yes, we do like to collaborate and partner with our customers where we're sensible and really do the learning that we need to do to optimize. I wouldn't say fundamentally change the design of a chip,
Okay.
but to optimize it and make it as useful as possible.
I mean, because that's the challenge of bringing something to life that has never existed before. And the customers, we say, yes, we need to listen to our customers. And that is absolutely true. But in a way, they don't know what that future is going to look like. And they don't have the capability to deliver on that future. And so we're asking them, maybe requesting them. I'm arguing the other side right now in a way. But but there is inevitably, there must be this kind of, all right, regardless in the science, we still have to pursue this line. We still have to approach it, we believe, in a particular way. Certainly in the application layer, and maybe in the hardware selection too, we may have to make some adjustments depending on which problems within the quantum universe we're going to go after and try to solve. And so I just wonder about those trade-offs when you're building something that's so potentially bold and powerful, and that is going to represent a new paradigm, a new way of doing things. And yet your partners and customers don't fully appreciate that new way of doing things. And so, they're not going to be able to share with you all of the answers that you need in order to skew your development in the right, along the right course. So it's this kind of trade-off.
Yeah, there's so much to say on that. I think, let me put, to your first point, let me put that in three categories. That's how I would look at it. There's the applications that we already know about, application areas we already know about, where we need to engage with the potential customers, end users, to really nail that down and understand where in their particular area it really becomes truly useful, right? And that mapping it is really important. That's where you have to listen to them. It's like, look, how do you operate? What's really difficult for you? So we can do that last bit of mapping. So that's one category, and I think that work has to happen today. We then have the second category where, I think one of the most striking things I find about the application side of quantum is that we already know about lots of amazing applications that make all the effort that goes into this way worth it today. But I'm absolutely convinced that we haven't found most of the coolest applications yet. And it's because we have to approach quantum from a completely different way. We have to change the way we ask our questions when we think about mapping a problem to quantum, because it's a machine that works so differently. That means if I go to an end user and say, what's your computational challenge today? That's in some sense the wrong question to ask, because they won't even know about it. They've been trained to not ask certain questions because they know it's impossible to do. So it's that sort of dreaming, that sort of, being really innovative in that area needs to happen. And that's not easy for people to get their head around. And then I've got the third bucket where, that gets to your scientific point of, doing more academic research in many ways on the application side. And getting better at really understanding the operation of quantum computers and, coming up with new algorithms and so on to provide us and end users with the tools to dream a bit more, right?
Yeah. You made some great points there. And the one that's really resonating for me right now is almost this other language you need to learn, or this other skill you need to learn as a user, as a prospective user of quantum computing, to be able to ask the right questions or to think about problems in a quantum-like way. We know how difficult it is for anyone to change their behavior in order to adapt a new technology. And there was a time where we didn't have internet and we didn't have software, that we didn't have mobile phones with, the world's knowledge and our fingertips. And over time, we've become, quite adept at adapting that technology to the way we think. And we've probably adapted the way we behave to the technology to an extent as well. And I wonder if part of the challenge with quantum is going to be something along those lines, where we're going to have to start thinking again about, we're going to have to rethink the way we approach problem solving for the quantum world. There will be kind of a Newtonian, for lack of a better metaphor, a Newtonian way of looking at the world with, the technology we have right now. And there will be, an Einsteinian way or a quantum way of looking at the world that's going to require us to think at a different level and ask questions at a different level and express the problems we're trying to solve in a different way.
I mean, what really, absolutely right. I think what really struck me only a few days ago, and you may have seen this as well, the sort of, I don't know if it's news, but the viral posts around the impact of finding novel ways of querying AI, right? And that sort of realization that's been coming out in the last few weeks. And you can get so much more out of it if you become really smart around how to query an AI tool. And I think that AI is just that sort of linear extension of our conventional computing capability. And now we're talking about quantum, which is on a completely different planet, right? So of course, the way we have to, change our thinking and our problem framing is just wildly different to what we're used to today.
Yeah, I think it's a great comparator. This is called the Lab to Market Leadership Podcast. So let's learn a little bit more about your lab to market journey so far. How did you guys start? What was kind of the catalyst? And can you talk a little bit about what that founding team looked like?
Yeah, so there's two founders, myself and Wilfried Hensinger, both coming out of the academic space, and I then took the lead, so to speak, on the sort of commercial journey here. And basically, what's happened, I think, around 2017, is that so us as an academic research group for years we've been focusing on finding ways to remove the roadblocks to scaling our particular technology, which is trapped ion-based quantum computing, to the million-qubit scale. And that was it was almost ridiculous thinking at the time. People were working with 1 or 2 qubits, and we're very happy with the work that they were doing there. And we always got a little bit worried about, well, would that work at the million-qubit scale? Probably not. We couldn't really see how that worked. So most of our research focus was really focusing on finding ways that would still work at the million-qubit scale. Now, in 2017, we then asked this really audacious question: would it technically be possible today, with lots of money, lots of great people, to build a million-qubit trapped ion quantum computer with the great work that's been happening in the community at the time, the work that we've been doing? Would that be possible? And so we teamed up with a number of great minds and went out to find the answer. And it turned out, once we went through that and a lot of hard work, that it would technically be possible. Really difficult, really hard, no doubt. But we saw a way of doing that. And I think with that realization also came the realization, oh my God, it's most certainly not going to be just a group of physicists building a million-qubit quantum computer. You need great engineering minds and just people you would never be able to attract to academia. You need a fantastic supply chain and lots of money. Basically, academia was made for that. So it has to really be that sort of commercial effort. And we really use that as the starting gun for Universal Quantum to then embark on that journey on commercially scaling up our sort of approach to quantum computing.
Yeah. And did you have the question that you asked, which I love, by the way, something really super bold, and then let's look at the obstacles that would be in our way, and could we in theory do this? And I'd love to talk about supply chain a little later, but let's stay with this for right now. But looking at was that then approach that you guys went on, the trapped ion approach, had that been based on your research up until that point? So then you could use that research as your starting point if you want. We're going to build on this stuff that we've already done and take that forward, as opposed to starting with a completely fresh slate.
Yeah, absolutely. It was that blueprint that we came up with and we published at the time as why it really became the foundation of the approach that we then followed at Universal Quantum. I think one of the, it was interesting actually, that the sort of scary moments in the early days was obviously why once we bring these great engineering minds on board, would they look at this and be like, well, guys, you missed this obvious thing and you can't do that. What are you doing, right? I'm a reasonably humble physicist to appreciate I definitely don't know everything. And that was a scary moment. But I think what we found is, more and more people joined and we had this and still continue to have this strong engineering focus. And it just kept getting more validation that that it would be hard, but this can be done.
Yeah.
And by the way, there might even be easier ways to doing it than what you guys thought, because you weren't aware of this particular engineering technique and so on. So it started to look even better than what we had initially. And I think if I look at where we are today to where we were back at the beginning, it's a completely different place. It's far more, manageable and exciting in terms of, how quickly we can get there and what's the cost involved and so on. Absolutely.
Yeah. The lots of questions here. That core team, it was you and your co-founder. When did you start hiring the next parts of the team?
Immediately. So for me, it was absolutely key that there were a few people from the research group I pulled over quite early on. But actually, the focus already in that spin out phase was to find some key engineers to come on early on. But crucially, I was keen on operations. I'm a culture fanatic, so to speak, and always have been. And I was absolutely convinced that operations is where it all starts. We're actually not the sort of company where tech, and I need to have an ops team to pay people. It was the other way around. And I made the decision to actually hire a phenomenal, great senior ops lead as one of the very, very first hires. And he's still with us now. He's built a fantastic operation. That was, I think, one of the best hires I've made early on. And then then started hiring more tech people and so on, build up the engineering function, etc. But ops, I think, it is key if you want to build a great culture.
What do you mean by ops? Operations can mean different things in different types of organizations.
Anything not
technical. Okay. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And so what was there? And so talk a little bit more about that. What was, what fell under their remit? What were the core things that you were looking for in hiring this person?
Culture fit. So I had in my mind what, and he would maybe say, sometimes a bit naively, but I had in my head what was sort of culture I would love to create. And so I spent a long time, and this is probably one of the slowest hires. And it took me a long time to make a decision there, but to find someone where that cultural alignment was there, and who was also much smarter on the culture side than I am. I didn't actually try to look for the best finance person or the best technically minded person on HR systems. It was the culture piece, the emotional intelligence that was absolutely key in that early hire. And then have them actually run all the non-technical side, take as much away from the technical people as possible. The tech guys just have to focus on their particular bit, on their expertise, and not worry about anything else, right? And that's what I was very keen to build that sort of operational environment as quickly as possible, and not be too scrappy in that area.
Okay. So to put a little bit more support around that. And so I'm an engineer. I join your company at this very early stage, and you've got your operations group within there. What would I have found? How would my experience have been?
Definitely ask our guys. But I would hope that the sort of answer they would give you is cared for, well looked after. That we we don't just care about them being delivering a great technical output, but we want them to be happy. We want them to feel supported, looked after, nurtured, cared for. I think is number one. I think the next bit is to find processes that make their life as easy as possible, to allow them to focus on being effective. And usually when you hire great people, they get a lot of energy out of being productive and not being slowed down by processes and distractions. And I think the other part is to have a great growth support around, right? Everyone loves to grow as a person, grow their technical skills. How do we do that? How do we do that as seamless and easy as possible? So it's these sort of things. But I think ultimately they should just feel that everyone cares about them, right? We spend so much time at work that's something that I think everyone should feel at work. So that was close to our heart.
And so, again, let me kind of drill down a little bit more into that. Is that around Is that around, I don't know, benefits? Is that around, it sounds like it's around some training and development. It's around maybe an onboarding experience. Can you kind of expand on how does it manifest? How does love and care or support, not love, but maybe support and care manifest itself in an early stage company when resources are often limited, where management experience is often limited, and where the task at hand is almost existential? We either do this or we die, because our next financing is predicated on us being able to deliver against this milestone, whatever it is. But this is wonderful because it's so unusual to hear this kind of approach taken at the early stage. But you got to help me understand how that support manifested itself early on.
Sure. If I could just, before I do that, pick up on your last point, because I think that is part of the crux of it. I strongly disagree with the premise of, well, we just have to get this done, otherwise we die. I actually think you get way more done if you have happy, well looked after people. Like it's, even if I was completely selfish and I only cared about the success of the company, you should look after your people because it makes them more productive and care for the company and go the extra mile. So wasn't really my drive. I love our guys and I really care for them. But even if you weren't that way inclined, you should still take that approach. But maybe to your first points, then yes, of course, it is around the sort of standard fundamentals on fair pay and not having to worry about that and benefits. But I think it comes down to smaller things, right? The day-to-day interactions. What are the values that we not just slap on our website and our standard boilerplates that we find everywhere, but what are they really? What does that mean day to day? How do we bring that into the interactions that we have in team meetings and outings that we have in how we deal with failure, how we deal with successes, all these sort of things. I think it actually comes in so many different ways across the organization on a day-to-day basis, outside of the big fundamentals, of course, that you mentioned as well.
I get it. So it's something that has got to be, and you're right, it's carried through those human interactions. And so Absolutely. If you want,
and therefore hiring, it actually, if you think about it, is all comes down to the hiring part. Because if you have this dream of what the culture should be like, then everyone you bring in, you've got to make sure that alignment is there, especially in the early days, where we've often turned people away who were supposedly smarter on paper or had better skills than some other people. I still truly believe that, yes, you can bring them in. They will not be as effective and impactful as someone else who on paper isn't quite as strong, but has got that cultural alignment, fits in, is a great team player, and just lives and breathes what we really want to achieve here. So that it all begins with the hiring. I think that's really, really important. And then obviously, once you have that, then you start having a bigger group of people who can hire people and can carry that culture, and this can grow more sustainably.
Yeah. Is that your North Star?
Oh yeah, very much so. Oh, absolutely. I think it would obviously be a fairy tale to also not point to that scalability part in the Million-Qubit, which is what we kind of center our work around, but the culture part and what I and the team spend so much time on is really that North Star. And let's do that together. I think that's the key bit.
How do you test for that? How do you test that a manager you're hiring or an individual you're hiring has got that capability? Because let's just leave that at the question. I could keep going on in that, but how do you do that?
I think it's really hard, and I don't have a standard playbook. I think a lot of it comes through a rigorous process. So we don't just have 2 rounds or 3 rounds. They get to talk to a lot of people from different areas. It's not always from the same team that they may get hired into. There are certain questions I think we've come up over time that help us test certain things. And again, where the ops people that we've hired, and in particular also the first ops hire that I mentioned, had a lot of experience in how to tease that out in an interview process. It's really, there's so many different facets to it. I couldn't just give you, look, these are the 3 things you need to do and you're going to be done. And I think a lot of it is also you just get a sense for these sort of things once you spend sufficient amount of time with the candidate. And I think the other part is to also be really open and honest, because it's a very interesting natural filter once you do that, where some people will look at us like, I don't want that. What are you doing? I just want this, cold, clear cut, just delivering sort of culture. Just be who you are and show that in these interviews and see what you get back. And it's very interesting what happens in that sort of process.
I bet. I think it's super, super interesting. You guys are trying to do something that from an engineering perspective is so freaking hard, and has not been done before. And other people are doing it. And so you've got to build this team. You want to keep, I'm guessing you need to one of the challenges is keeping that team together so that knowledge is you build up your base of knowledge, and then you're able to do different things with that knowledge, mainly learn from it. But you need those same people around. You need them to continue to build on that knowledge. You need them, failure is going to be the norm. Failure is going to represent a large chunk of the outcome for a lot of what you're doing. And that's entirely right, because, but hopefully over time, you wiggle your way towards up into the right trajectory in terms of progress. Everyone wants that. But you've also got to somehow keep this team together, and you got to keep them working together. And you want it to be enjoyable. And I think a lot of experienced managers really, especially in the deep tech industries broadly, I think my observation would be that they've struggled with that, especially within R&D departments, especially within engineering. They've struggled to create that culture where people are happy to come in. They feel free to do their best work. They're the kind of environments where people want to stay, so that they're not having that regular turnover. Because once you get that regular staff turnover, man, it is so hard to get that knowledge sharing back. So, you need these really unusual people who have that emotional intelligence and are able to translate that into behavior and create the kind of environment where engineers are going to feel happy working and doing great work.
Yeah, you've nailed it. I wholeheartedly agree with everything you've just said.
This is an interview on YouTube. I keep on kind of talking my way through this and just, I really get it. I really get that approach. It's just, it is not common. We don't see that approach very often.
And I think, remember as well that we have a very interdisciplinary team, right? It's not just about building a great electronics engineering team or a great software team. They all, need to work together. We're covering the full breadth of what you'd find in tech, I think, in one team. They speak a different language, right? And how do you deal with that? How do you make sure that doesn't cause all sorts of conflicts? How do you, and to your point on, how long people stay around, what does your churn look like? This is a long-term journey that we're on, right? That this is, we don't have 6-month sprint to get a product out. It doesn't work that way. So how do you, look after that retention part? And how do you keep people motivated? Because there's lots of failure, and even the things that work just take so much longer than what many of the engineers who come from, the Googles and the Apples of this world, it's a bit faster to see the output of their labor. And I think that these are all
it's
things
faster where you are, or it's faster where they are.
It's faster where they are. I mean, if you have this audacious goal, it takes some time to get there, and it takes a while to iterate through the different generations of quantum computers. So it's a bit different to, I've got a next generation phone coming out, or whatever someone may have been working on. And that just requires, it means, if you really think about it, it's therefore our job to look after them even more, right? It's because it's not easy for them at all. So there's that extra, I think, ask on us to make extra sure that they're well looked after.
Yeah. Is there a case for varying the management style at times? Let me maybe there are certain types of individuals who perform well when the pressure is really on and there's a bit more fear injected into the proceedings. And you get that extra. It's not advisable for the long term. You're not going to get very far in the long term if people are constantly running on adrenaline. That burns them out, and eventually they'll burn out and kick over. But if I think about what, let's say, Elon Musk has done, I mean, he runs through management teams like no one's business. He's not. I admire what he's done with SpaceX and partly with Tesla as well. So those teams have achieved results, but it comes at a price. Is there ever a point at which varying the management style to eke out that extra 10 to 15%, if it's even that might result in a critical milestone, is ever worth it?
So my view on that, and I've thought about this, and I think the Elon Musk example is a really interesting one that I have wondered about. I think that there's lots of different management styles that give you success, but I think that the question is how you define success, right? You can go by output, and clearly SpaceX has been very successful.
Yeah,
the human cost to it, I do wonder about, and I think at some point it becomes on what I personally, and everyone has their own style, I can kind of sign off and feel comfortable with, and that's maybe not something I would be that comfortable with, but actually where my core belief comes in, because also as a leader of a company, you have responsibility to shareholders and so on, to do the right thing there, is that if you look after people really well, there are always points in time where, look, it's all hands on deck. Like we've got to get this thing done right now. But you don't go through fear. You go through people caring about each other, caring about the company, wanting the company to be successful, and they will go the extra mile. So they don't need the stick of being like, you get fired if you don't do that by next week. They will just do it because they want to do it. And I think the
you don't
output,
have to convince them.
You get them moving fast. Exactly.
You don't have to spend the energy on riling them up, on scaring them. It's already there. They're ready to do it.
Exactly. Now, I would agree that there will be people who would maybe take advantage of that. And, be like, oh, but this is just so comfortable and no, I just won't do that. And it again comes back to the hiring and making sure that you make the right decisions at that point where you look after them and they will come through for you. No doubt about that. You may not even have to ask them because they know. They know and they will go the extra mile.
Yeah. I get that. Let me change tack a little bit. The journey you're on is a long journey. That's not unusual for lab to market companies, especially in and there aren't many that are bolder than quantum. The commercialization pathway or the route, and there are different companies that are equally as moonshot oriented. Nuclear fusion is one. We had a guest recently from the nuclear fusion industry and talking about the challenges of putting together a commercialization program when you still don't have reactors, you still don't have this new form of energy generation. And with quantum computers, I'm curious as to how that works as well. How do you continue to build the enthusiasm amongst the investor base and amongst, what kind of commercial activity can take place when you're still trying to get to, as you say, to 1 million qubits, where actually, and as I understand it, it's 1 million qubits where you can start to enjoy some of the benefits of real quantum computing. 1 million to 20 million is broadly the kind of sweet spot. How do you guys handle that? How do you think about that?
Yeah, so I mean, for us personally, as Universal Quantum, we try to be. I think honesty is really important here. You need to give people the upside and the vision, and be optimistic. Also, in the timescales involved, but you don't want to go too far. You don't want to get too hypey on that. So I think honesty is really important there. Again, it acts as a filter in getting the right investors on board and so on. That was a difficult part for us at the beginning because there were a lot of promises made in the field early on. It's like, hey, 2-3 years, small number of qubits will actually, change the world already. This will be amazing. And we stuck to our guns. Painful at the beginning for sure. Nowadays, with that realization of, oh man, we do really need to scale because these promises haven't haven't stood up to what we thought would happen. It's making our life a little bit easier because we don't have to change our messaging. We are just who we are, and we've always communicated in that way. But I think this is also, one of the challenges as a founder and an academic founder is finding that line between, really strong hype and being like, look, this will happen in 2 years. Just believe me, so I can get my next round done, or I can get the new customer in, and let's deal with the ramifications of that later. To I'm just going to be really honest, and maybe even a bit too pessimistic as an academic in how fast we can go. Finding that line is a moral conundrum I sometimes find, and not an easy one, because you know what investors would love to hear, really, but you have to be honest as well. So I think we've taken we're very optimistic, we're very ambitious, but we're being very clear where the journey needs to go. Now, I do actually, we nowadays we understand that, yes, we need to get to millions of qubits, but there's some lower hanging fruits along that journey that will start to deliver some interesting impact. So we can tell a nicer story, or a slightly more short-term story, but it's just convincing people, making people realize it's not all about the low-hanging fruits. You've got to think long-term. You've got to think to millions of qubits, because that's where the really big applications are. And this is why I mentioned governments initially as well, who, if you have to think about protecting your economic prosperity, having access to this sort of technology in the future, you can't be distracted by low-hanging fruits. It's a nice to have, but you've got to have something that goes all the way. And that's where we gravitate much more towards that than maybe some shorter term thinking in some companies where they just want a POC for 2 years and move on and say, we've done quantum. So I think you've got to be careful with your messaging, but it is our job to dream for them a little bit. And this is where, I hype in terms of saying, look, these are the things that may be possible. Let's dream a little bit, very comfortable with. Timescales where people really overpromise is, I think, counterproductive for the sector. And unfortunately, it's very common in the sector at the moment. It's for sure an issue in my opinion.
Yeah, you're right. I think a lot of that hype, and there's a lot of hyperbole around deep tech, and we start to pay the price for it when these things don't deliver, and then it impacts everyone. And so it's this kind of self-perpetuating cycle of BS. And so there's a sense that we need leaders, and you're certainly following this, but we need leaders of these young companies to have some responsibility when it comes to messaging and the setting of expectations. That we will realize a lot of benefit from this, but this is going to be a long journey, and we have to be patient. And it's difficult if you're it's difficult if you occupy a role anywhere along that value chain. If you're an entrepreneur, it's difficult. If you're an investor hoping to realize a return in 5 years, 10 years, whatever, that's difficult, especially in deep tech. If you're a policymaker, it's difficult. If you're a corporate exec looking to benefit from innovation and partner with young startups, so it's all difficult. And when it gets difficult, we tend to want to move a little faster and cut corners and hope for the best and close our eyes and stick our hands in our ears and hope it's going to be okay. And it really is. And so we need to exercise that control a little bit and say calm and be patient, and we'll get there. But it's, these are long journeys. These are really hard things we're trying to do.
Agreed. Absolutely.
Tell me a little bit about your approach to kind of building your team. You mentioned you've got quite a multidisciplinary team. There are some approaches in deep tech when it comes to building out the team and it comes to scaling, where I've heard people, some companies think, look, we're going to keep it nice and small for as long as we can. And we're going to learn as much as we can. And we're only going to hire when we accomplish certain milestones. And we're going to learn our lessons and we're going to build on those lessons. But we want to be really conservative with our capital. So we're really responsible with the money we raise. And then I've heard lots of others where, no, we need more brains on this. We need more hands on this. We just need to scale much faster. And we're going to fail faster. And we're going to learn our lessons faster. And hopefully we're able to keep our momentum going and keep the investment coming in. Where do you guys sit in that, on that question?
Most certainly initially it was a bit of both. breadth was really important to us at the beginning, because we wanted to make sure that we didn't miss something across the whole stack. Coming out of academia, being very physics focused, quantum focused, there were huge areas of what was on us that we were not experts in, and we were just so keen to get eyes on that and be like, look, are we thinking about this in the right way? How should we structure that? So it was actually about focusing more on senior hires in the different areas. And I'm a strong believer anyway to, get their heads in first, and then they can structure the team the way they would like to do it, rather than hiring junior and then putting a head on and being like, good luck, have fun with what I thought maybe want to have. So it was actually going that way first, and hiring people who were, yes, senior, but very happy to get their hands dirty. That was always really important to me, because you can get manager types who, great brains, but they're just used to managing, but they can't go down and get their hands dirty. So if you want breadth, but you don't have the money to also hire big teams, you've got to find the people who can go deep. So there was a strong focus on that initially. Nowadays, it's getting the number of people in particular areas of focus in as quickly as possible to scale is becoming more of a thing. But initially, it was that breadth that we were after.
But relying on people being able to perform as ICs, as individual contributors, and also in terms of building the trust amongst that early engineer, especially with engineers. If you want to build trust with the engineers, then the engineering leader better be able to engineer him or herself.
Right.
They better be able to get their hands dirty and kind of get fully stuck in, and not just sit there on the sidelines managing.
Right. And it made a lot of sense to, when thinking that through, it just made doubly sense, because I always felt like and we have a strong push to encourage growth and promotion internally to turn ICs into managers and so on. But I've got this strong belief that the people who resist me the most are actually the best managers in the end. The people who don't really want to be necessarily managers, who don't strive particularly just for that, are actually really good managers. So it's therefore looking for people who, would look at me with a smile when I said, look, you're not going to manage a team at the beginning. I need some IC, skills here. That was a natural filter again, that they might be the right people to bring on. Yeah.
The people who were, so what you're saying is the people who were initially reluctant to manage were actually some of the people who wound up being the best managers. And that doesn't surprise me.
I think so.
That doesn't surprise me. But from the sound of it, in the early days, you went a little bit because of the breadth that you were trying to deal with, and given the nature of the build out of your plan, which is to build full stack, then except at the application later on, then to partner up. But the nature of your build up meant that you had to be broader, and so you needed people from different domain areas, different disciplines.
Yeah, that's right.
And okay, that makes sense. A supply chain with a field like quantum, when you're building a quantum computer, talk a little bit about suppliers. Do all of the technologies and materials that you guys require, do they currently exist? Or are you waiting for stuff to be developed as well that's going to be critical for the performance of these ultimate computers?
Yeah, I love you asking this question. So for us as Universal Quantum, the answer is a resounding yes. And I think that it's been part of that early work to get our architecture into a shape where we can say yes to that. And I think not just for what we need today, but for what we need at the Million-Qubit scale. That is the absolute critical thing. I think it's often, I feel like, underrepresented in the community. People say, making my chips in the standard foundry and so on. But that's maybe today, but not really talking openly about, well, what does that look like at the Million-Qubit scale? What do you really need at that scale? Because they may not think of it in that way. They may have different aims as a business. For us, it was just all about the Million-Qubit scale and work backwards from there, and making sure that the key technologies do exist. We don't have to invent new materials or completely new processes in the semiconductor fabs and so on, to be able to leverage as much as possible of what's out there. Now, that doesn't mean that everything is easy, what we're doing. Everything is hard, what we're doing. And sometimes, suppliers need to they obviously have a roadmap, and it's about aligning yourself with their roadmap, and not being a burden to them and being like, look, can you please do something completely different to what you would really like to do? It's all about that, and aligning yourself with those sort of suppliers and roadmaps. That was really important to us. So a lot of energy goes into it, because we don't make our own chips. It's all in the supply chain. We're an integrator in many ways. That's how you can think of it.
Yeah. Can you give us a sense, Seb, of roughly where you are in your journey?
So high level, we are basically at a point where we have demonstrated all the key fundamental building blocks of a million-qubit device from a gate perspective. One of the key things in scaling is modularity. Can you connect individual modules together in a quantum way? Again, something people don't like talking about. We've developed an error-free way of connecting modules together in a quantum way, which was previously thought is impossible. We're doing all that integration work, the chip-level integration work for our modules at the moment, and soon we'll have some really cool announcements on that as well. So we're starting to move into the sort of scaling phase where we can really start to scale these systems up, which is really important. But that required a different approach. You won't find our machines in the cloud right now. That's not been our focus. You can go to some great people who will allow you to do that. It's actually getting the engineering, the architecture into a place on which we can then scale and get to these low-hanging fruits initially as quickly as possible, and ultimately all the way to the million-qubit scale.
I get it. And when do you think, two more questions, when do you think we're going to have a quantum computer? A million-qubit scale quantum computer?
A million-qubit scale quantum computer. I'm always in two minds if I should really answer that question, because if I answer it would already be wrong, because if one is completely honest, I couldn't nail it down to the month or maybe even exactly the year with sufficient confidence right now. But I think from a roadmap perspective, what nowadays I think from an investor point of view is becoming interesting as well, is that these sort of things start to fit into a fund's life cycle. And I think that is a really interesting change in demand for us, at least, from our roadmap perspective.
So 5 to 10 years? Yeah,
maybe closer to the upper end of that. But, for a million qubits, that's the sort of timeline one starts thinking about.
Yeah. And what do you think the first problems are going to, where will we see quantum computing apply? Sorry, let me rephrase that. What will be some of the first problems we solve with quantum computing?
I think some of the low-hanging fruits you find in the optimization space. So, that can be around supply chain optimization. So optimization in general has some lower hanging fruits. I think then we get more into some of the simulation space, maybe around drug discovery, chemistry in particular, starting to understand more complex materials and chemical reactions and so on. And then you keep going further up towards drug design, synthetic testing, all the way to the end of code breaking, CFD simulations, which have some of the more tougher requirements on the hardware.
Yes. I wonder about the increased defense spending that we're going to see now in Europe and the UK. And given the geopolitical landscape, increased defense spending historically has led to additional innovation in science and technology. And I do wonder if that's going to focus minds, particularly in quantum, given the benefits that quantum can potentially usher in within defense.
It's a really interesting area at the moment. I think what I really like about that defense focus is that when you map out the applications of quantum computing for defense, they on average come with the higher ask, so really pushing to a very large number of qubits. And I think that it is maybe disappointing on the short term for defense, but actually really helpful, because like you said, it focuses the mind on really trying to take that technology all the way and not getting so distracted with, oh, what can I do with 100 qubits or 1,000 qubits, which certainly for defense is somewhat irrelevant, right?
Yeah. But then they can help to calm the behavior of certain nervy other investors by saying, we're not stopping. Or they step in like DARPA has done in the past and they say, sorry, but we're going to continue to fund this. And
I think they can step in. They can step in, and they're also used to longer development cycles and technology taking some time. If you think about how long a weapon system takes from initial idea to actually being out in the field, these are really long time scales, even compared to quantum computing in many cases. If you look at a submarine program, right? So they're far more accustomed to the time scales we're talking about.
Exactly. Seb, I could keep on talking. Thank you so much. This has been, we've covered a lot of ground. And it's been wonderful to have you on the show. So thank you so much for giving me and us your time today.
Thanks so much, Chris. Really enjoyed it. This is great.
You've been listening to the Lab to Market Leadership Podcast, brought to you by Deep Tech Leaders. This podcast has been produced by Bauhaus. You can find out more about us on LinkedIn, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts.